I was out on patrol in the wilderness, cruising along the winding dirt road with my trusty radio crackling away at my side. It was just another day on the job, but I loved the thrill of the unknown that came with every turn. As I drove, the sky began to darken, and I could feel a storm brewing on the horizon. I checked the radio to see if there were any updates on the weather, but as soon as I picked it up, I knew something was wrong. The crackling sound was gone, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from deep within the radio itself. I tried to adjust the channels, but every frequency was dead. I cursed under my breath, feeling a sense of unease creeping over me. My radio was my lifeline out here, and without it, I was stranded in the wilderness. I decided to turn back towards the ranger station, hoping to get a new radio or fix the issue. But as I drove, the storm began to rage around me, with thunder and lightning crackling through the air. I realized with growing horror that the storm was getting worse, and my vehicle was struggling to navigate the rugged terrain. And with my radio out of commission, I was completely alone. As I crested a hill, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There in the distance was a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was tall and shadowy, with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, just stood there watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that there was something not quite human about this figure. It was as if it was made of the very darkness itself. Suddenly I heard a sound that made me jump in my seat. It was a voice, crackling through my radio, somehow breaking through the static. It was a woman's voice, distorted and barely audible, but I could make out the words she was saying, a warning that sent shivers down my spine. "Beware the darkness," she said. "It's watching you." I looked back towards the figure, but it was gone, and in its place was a feeling of dread that I couldn't shake. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking as I tried to turn the radio back on, but it was no use. The device was completely dead. I was alone in the wilderness with no way to call for help. Panic started to set in, but I knew I had to stay calm. I had to figure out a way to survive until help arrived. I checked my backpack and found a map, a compass, and a few supplies, including a knife and some matches. I had some experience with survival skills, but I never expected to use them in a situation like this. I decided to follow the trail and try to find my way back to the ranger station. It was a long shot, but it was better than staying in one place. As I walked, I noticed strange things happening around me. The trees seemed to twist and turn, and the shadows moved in ways that defied logic. It was as if the forest itself was alive, and it was watching me. I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind and focus on finding my way back. But as I walked deeper into the wilderness, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I eventually came across a clearing, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the center of the clearing, watching me. It was tall and slender with impossibly long arms and legs. Its skin was pale and translucent, and its eyes glowed in the darkness. It was a creature straight out of a nightmare, and it was staring right at me. I froze, unsure of what to do. The creature started to move towards me, and I realized I had to run. I turned and sprinted back the way I came, hoping to outrun the creature, but it was no use. The creature was faster than me, and it quickly caught up. It grabbed me with its long, bony fingers, and I felt a surge of cold energy flow through my body. Everything went dark, and when I woke up, I was back at the ranger station. I never spoke about what happened that night, but I knew that I had encountered something truly paranormal in the wilderness, and I knew that I would never be the same again. I was checking on the various sites of park and making sure everything was in order. It was a peaceful day, and the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over everything around me. As I drove my vehicle along the winding road, I noticed that the engine was starting to make strange noises. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just a minor issue that would fix itself. But then the engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I got out of the vehicle to check what was wrong, but I couldn't see anything obvious. It was as if the car had just given up for no reason at all. I cursed under my breath, knowing that I was miles away from any help. As I looked around, I realized that I was deep in the heart of the park, surrounded by dense forests and steep hills. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves and the distant chirping of birds. It was a beautiful place, but it was also dangerous, especially when you were stranded with no way out. I decided to start walking, hoping that I would come across a sign of civilization, or at least a place where I could get some help. But the more I walked, the deeper I seemed to get into the wilderness. The trees grew thicker, the hills steeper, and the silence more unnerving. As I walked, I felt a strange presence around me, as if I was being watched. At first, I brushed it off as just my imagination, but the feeling persisted. It was as if something was following me, something that didn't want me to leave. I quickened my pace, but the feeling only grew stronger. I felt like I was being surrounded, like there were eyes on me from all sides. I tried to shake it off, but my nerves were frayed, and I felt a sense of dread building inside me. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me. It was a low growl, and it was getting louder. I turned around to see a pack of wolves emerging from the trees. They were big, with sharp teeth and gleaming eyes, and they were headed straight for me. I knew that I was no match for them, so I started to run. But they were fast, and they were closing in on me quickly. I felt their hot breath on my heels, and I knew that I was in trouble. Just as I thought all hope was lost, a figure appeared out of nowhere. It was a man, dressed in furs and carrying a bow. He shot an arrow at the wolves, and they scattered, running back into the forest. I was shocked, and I turned to thank the man, but he had disappeared. It was as if he had never been there at all. I continued walking, my heart racing and my mind reeling. I knew that I had just experienced something truly paranormal, something that defied all explanation, but I also knew that I was alive, thanks to the mysterious stranger who had saved me. As I walked, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that I was not alone, that there was something out there watching over me. And I also knew that I would never forget the strange encounter in the wilderness and the eerie feeling that followed me all the way back to civilization. As I was struggling to free myself, the sound of footsteps grew louder, and I knew that whatever was out there was getting closer. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my mind raced with all sorts of horrible scenarios. Suddenly, a loud and piercing scream filled the air, sending chills down my spine. The sound was inhuman, like nothing I had ever heard before, and I knew in that moment that I was not alone. I struggled harder, pushing against the branches and trying to break free, but it was no use. The footsteps grew closer still, and I knew that whatever was coming was almost upon me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the screaming stopped, and there was nothing but silence. I strained my ears, trying to hear anything that might indicate the presence of another creature, but there was nothing. For what felt like hours, I lay there, waiting and listening, but nothing happened. Eventually, exhausted and shaken, I fell into an uneasy sleep. When I awoke, it was to the sound of birds singing and the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. I was still tangled up in the branches, but the fear and panic of the night before had subsided somewhat. I slowly extricated myself from the underbrush, checking myself for injuries as I did so. But apart from a few scratches and bruises, I seemed to be unharmed. As I made my way back to my vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, something otherworldly and malevolent. And although I never saw it again, the memory of that night stayed with me for the rest of my life. A reminder that there are things in this world that we cannot understand, and that we should always be wary of what lurks in the shadows. I was tasked with monitoring the wilderness and maintaining trails. It was a dangerous job, but I loved it. I had spent years studying the flora and fauna of the park, and I was passionate about protecting it. One day, I was out on a trail, working to clear some debris after a heavy storm. The weather was terrible, with heavy rain and strong winds making it difficult to see and move around. I was focused on my work, so I didn't notice the slippery rocks and mud underfoot. As I made my way along the trail, I lost my footing and slipped. I slid down a steep slope and tumbled into a ravine. It happened so quickly that I didn't even have time to react. I hit the bottom of the ravine hard and felt a sharp pain in my leg. I tried to stand up, but my leg wouldn't support my weight. It was broken. I was alone, injured and stranded in the middle of nowhere. To make matters worse, the weather was getting worse by the minute. The rain was coming down harder, and the wind was picking up speed. I knew I had to find shelter, but I couldn't move. My leg was too badly injured, and I didn't have any supplies with me. I was completely exposed to the elements, and I knew I wouldn't survive the night if I didn't find help soon. As the darkness closed in around me, I began to hear strange noises in the distance. It sounded like something was moving through the underbrush, slowly and deliberately. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just an animal looking for food, but as the noise grew louder, I couldn't help feeling uneasy. Suddenly I heard a low growl, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was a sound I had never heard before. It was deep and menacing, and it seemed to come from all around me. I realized with growing horror that I was being stalked by something. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could feel its presence. It was circling around me, moving closer and closer with each passing moment. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream for help. And then I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, staring at me from the shadows. They were yellow and piercing like those of a predator. I could sense the danger and malice in those eyes, and I knew I was in grave danger. I heard the sound of footsteps coming closer, and then I saw the shape of a massive creature emerge from the darkness. It was tall, muscular, and covered in fur. Its eyes glinted in the moonlight, and its snout was pointed directly at me. I realized with growing horror that I was being stalked by a dogman, a creature of legend that was said to roam the wilderness. It was a being that was half man, half dog, with the strength and ferocity of both. As the creature moved closer, I could smell its hot, rancid breath. It was the stench of death and decay, and it made me sick to my stomach. I knew that I was no match for this creature, injured and alone as I was. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the attack, but it didn't come. Instead, I heard the sound of the creature moving away from me, disappearing back into the darkness. I breathed a sigh of relief, grateful to have survived. But the fear and trauma of that night stayed with me for a long time. I knew that the dogman was still out there lurking. I tried to stand up, but my ankle was throbbing with pain. I must have twisted it pretty badly when I fell. I was miles away from any help, and my radio was dead. I was stranded. As I sat there in the cold and dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It was as if the wind had stopped blowing and the entire forest had gone silent. I felt vulnerable and exposed, like a sitting duck waiting to be hunted. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise in the distance. It sounded like a low growl, and it was getting louder and closer. I tried to stand up again, but my ankle was still too weak. I looked around frantically, trying to find something to defend myself with. That's when I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. They were amber, like a wolf's eyes, but they were much larger and closer together. And they were coming right at me. I knew what it was. I had heard stories of them before, but I had never encountered one myself. It was a dogman, a creature that was half man, half wolf, and completely terrifying. I reached for my pepper spray, but it was too late. The dogman was already upon me. It was massive, standing on two legs like a man but covered in fur like a wolf. It had sharp teeth and claws, and it smelled of wet fur and decay. I tried to fight back, but it was too strong. It knocked me to the ground and pinned me down with its massive paw. I could feel its hot breath on my face as it snarled and snapped its jaws at me. I thought I was going to die, but then, out of nowhere, a bright light appeared in the sky. It was blinding, and I had to shield my eyes from it. When I looked back, the dogman was gone. I heard a voice in my head clear as day. It said, "You are not alone. We are watching over you." And then the light disappeared, and the forest was dark again. I don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was just a hallucination caused by the pain and fear. But I know what I saw and felt, and I will never forget it. From that day on, I never went into the forest alone. I always carried a weapon just in case. Because in the national park, you never know what's waiting for you in the dark.